Joining us now is the former Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringla ji. Harshvardhan Shringla ji, namaste.
Namaste, Anandji.
Jai Hind, and thank you for your time. How would you read the current situations, the escalation ladder that both Israel and Iran have now climbed?
Well, Anand, what we have seen yesterday was a severe escalation in the Middle East conflict. As we know, the conflict began about a year ago, the present phase of the conflict, when Hamas launched a unilateral and unprovoked attack, terrorist attack into Israel, killed a number of civilians and took a number of civilians hostages. That precipitated an Israeli response. Israel then entered the Gaza Strip and have been there ever since in that attempt to deal with Hamas and rescue the hostages. In the meantime, we've seen an escalation from, the Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis from Yemen. Both these entities, as well as Hamas, as we know, are controlled by Iran. What I think is the difference is that now Iran has got directly involved in this conflict. So far, it has been activating its proxies or the entities it controls. But now it seems to have got into the conflict directly. And yesterday's wave of ballistic missile attacks on Israel was not the first; it was the second time this has happened. But clearly, it represents a major escalation. The other factor, of course, is that while it was in the beginning just Israel and the Hamas in the Gaza Strip, today Israel is involved also in terms of its physical presence in southern Lebanon. Israeli troops, as we speak, have crossed into southern Lebanon and are attempting what they call a limited military operation. I don't know how limited that will be, but they have, across Lebanon. This is not the first time they've crossed Lebanon. It was in 2006 that, you had Resolution 1701 that was in the aftermath of that conflict between Israel and the Hezbollah. The Houthis are pretty far away, but Israel has demonstrated it can strike right up to Yemen, which is much further away even than Iran. But Iran itself is within the reach of Israel. And if you saw, both the United States and Israel are talking about retaliation.
Yes.
U.S. National Security Advisor talked about severe consequences. And so the next phase of this conflict is likely to be even more, I would say, severe than the previous phases. A direct confrontation between two states. So far, it has been a state, that is Israel, fighting with non-state actors. But now, two states are directly involved in this conflict. Both states have the capacities to inflict enormous damage, their military capacities. And it is entering a worrying phase where, things could escalate even beyond the region. Because the US has put its troops on alert, I think has brought in more assets into the region. There are other partners and allies of the United States like UK. And clearly, I think, this, if you see, there is a G7 emergency meeting that's been called, and things seem to be taking a turn for the worse. So there is concern all right.
But in this case, Iran has said, you try and attack our refineries, we'll set the neighboring neighborhood, we will take the fight into the neighborhood and also the neighborhood refineries to fire. They have also said that they are trying to call all the Islamic nations to come together in this grouping, although a lot of them have tried to steer clear. There has been attack via Sudan at the UAE mission there in Sudan also. So there are some other ripples and repercussions. How would you read that?
So there are various fault lines that we have to look at. I mean, one of them is the Shia-Sunni fault line, because Iran represents, a Shia power in the region. So the Hezbollah, the Houthis are Shia auxiliaries. Hamas is not, of course. Hamas is a Sunni auxiliary. But by involving itself directly in a conflict with Israel, through the Hamas, through the Hezbollah, through the Houthis, and now directly, Iran is saying that we are fighting the cause for the entire Ummah. In other words, they are fighting for the Muslim world.
Yes.
Whereas those established powers in that region themselves are not involved, and as such is trying to take a certain amount of credit. But I think you can also miscalculate in this, because I don't think Iran wanted to get very deep into this conflict. They wanted just to show and demonstrate that they are, how would you say, they are invested in this conflict. they would have preferred to work through proxies, through Hamas. Activate Hamas before the Abraham's Accord could be signed. Activate Hezbollah so that Israel is distracted. Activate the Houthis in the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, and
Yes.
of course, directly with Israel. But now that they're directly involved, I think it takes on a new phase, and it could also be detrimental to their interests because Israel can inflict damage to strategic targets inside Iran, whether
Yeah.
it is petroleum refineries, whether it is even the Natanz, nuclear facilities. We don't
Yes.
know, but I mean, obviously, Israel has demonstrated it has both the intelligence and the reach. And the fact that Iran is talking about, taking the conflict elsewhere into, say, the Gulf or areas that Western interests are strongly represented in, it's actually saying that if you do something to us, we may not respond symmetrically, we may respond asymmetrically.
Correct.
It may not hit out on Israel because it has shown what it can do, and that is what it can do. And
Fr-
yesterday's attack did not inflict the sort of casualties that might have been expected.
True, and Israel claims not much damage has been done. Iran claims otherwise. But this now no longer remains a proxy war, Harsh Shringla ji. From Bharat's point of view, we've got strategic interests here. The Chabahar port agreements and some rekindling there has happened with Iran. Engagements have happened. There is the I2U2 pact where America, UAE, and Israel are involved. There is the India-Middle Eastern Economic Corridor, which goes all the way up to Italy. That also passes through some of these kingdoms and some of these regions. What happens to all of that?
So we have huge stakes in the region, starting with 9 million Indians who work and live in the Gulf area. We've got very good relations with Israel. We've got good relations with Iran. We work with countries across the region. And if you saw the conversation between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu, Prime Minister Modi said that terrorism cannot be justified and there is no place for terrorism in the world. But at the same time, he said that we should make all efforts to basically ensure that there is no regional escalation, which is happening, and to ensure the safety of hostages, which is important in Gaza. And then, of course, we have also Prime Minister offered that India is committed to doing whatever it can, whatever efforts it can for an early restoration of peace in the region.
Yeah.
So what we are saying is that it's so, we are so invested in the area. There is so much at stake for us, and that we are always happy to work in a manner that can be conducive to bring about peace and,
Right.
better, I would say, relations in the region. Something like what we have done in Ukraine and Russia, because we have, as I said, good relations with all concerned.
Correct.
So we have the ability to tell all concerned that, look, this is the time that you should sit down and talk to each other, because an escalation can be detrimental to your interests, but to interests of everybody else also. I mean, this is really having the propensity to escalate into a larger conflict and one
Right.
that can engulf all of us. So I think we have to keep that in mind. And in that, I think Prime Minister Modi's message is very important in that context.
True. My final question, Harsh Shringla ji, do you believe that there could be a certain escalation from both sides in the near future in this region, so that perhaps there is some backing off and taking the foot off the pedal in Ukraine? Is there a connection here?
Well, the connection is that, one conflict takes off, the other one goes into the back burner. I mean, there are some concerns expressed that the Middle East conflict is taking up a lot of the bandwidth. And as a result, I think there is some sort of, less attention and focus on the Ukraine conflict. I think they're interlinked from the point of view that, the resources are the same. The Americans will have the same munitions that they would have to give to Israel or they'd have to give to Ukraine.
Ji.
The Western world will have to focus their attentions on, do they focus on the Middle East or do they focus on the Ukraine conflict? So these are issues that are dilemmas. I mean, obviously, nobody wants to see multiple fronts. Israel is fighting on 4 fronts already. But the fact is that it does divert the attention, at least from the Western world. It's not in their interest that it continues. President Biden has always been talking about a ceasefire. But one factor you have to note is that the US is distracted at this point of time because of its presidential elections.
Yes.
There's also a time where all the protagonists know that whatever gains they have to make on the ground, they have to make them now, to create facts on the ground now. So if Ukraine has to occupy the Kursk region in Russia, you do it now. If Russia has to take over parts of Donetsk and Luhansk, you have to do it now. If the Israelis have to get into Lebanon and occupy parts of southern Lebanon which are troublesome, you do it now. If the Iranians have to demonstrate to the larger, Muslim or Arab world that they are basically doing it for them, they have to do it now. So all the protagonists are all charged up because they know that this is the time that they have to accomplish their gains whichever way possible, or accomplish their objectives in whichever way possible before a US president is sworn in and starts coming down quite heavily on the region and on the regions concerned. And different presidents will take a different approach, but at the end of the day, there'll be far more focus on bringing some of these conflicts under some control. So here you have to see that, read that context. I think at this point of time, the global predominant power is preoccupied, and the regional players are sort of doing what they can to, including Iran. I mean, and especially Iran, I would say, is doing what they can to create facts on the ground.
True, interesting perspective. Nations like Bharat are saying yahi samay hai, sahi samay hai with respect to vikas, whereas these protagonists are saying yahi samay hai, sahi samay hai with respect to vinash.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very well put.
Thank you, Harsh Shringla ji. Thank you for speaking
Thanks
with us.
a lot. Thank you. Take care.